You're listening to Hooked on Creek, a podcast celebrating the music, history, and fans of the legendary jam band Max Creek. I am your host, Korre Johnson, and you are listening to episode 27.
On this winter's eve, a banana tree beckons the ground, and for a moment I hear a wintry sound, but tis you. Rumbling your swollen glow, not to singe but embrace. I thought I left you in some other place, but I have found you in the jungles of Costa Rica. I have found you in Costa Rica.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 27 of Hooked on Creek. I am very excited to share with you my conversation with Frank Messina. Frank is an award-winning and widely recognized poet, spoken word artist, and author. Frank has been a frequent guest on stage with Max Creek, performing his poetry with the band since the mid-1990s. We cover a lot of ground in this episode, including Frank's introduction to Max Creek, his background as an artist, the relationship between music and poetry, and his enduring love for Max Creek. Frank also shares some incredible memories of performing in Costa Rica with Max Creek and Bill Kreutzmann from the Grateful Dead. Actually, this episode kicked off with a taste of that live performance recorded back on January 21st, 2011. And be sure to stick around after the interview because this episode concludes with a beautiful recording of Frank performing his poetry with Max Creek at the Webster Theater in Hartford, Connecticut back on September 19th, 1998. You can get more information about this episode and read an entire transcript of my interview with Frank Messina on the Hooked on Creek website. Just go to hookedoncreek.com, and while you're there, click the contact link and let me know what you think. All right, now let's get started. Frank Messina, welcome to Hooked on Creek.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's an honor.
Frank, you are an award-winning poet, a spoken word artist, an actor, a painter, an author, and probably several other things. But among these, you are also a huge fan of Max Creek. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. Well, perhaps the best place to start our conversation is at the beginning. So I'm curious, how were you first exposed to the music of Max Creek?
Both my brothers went to Hartford University back in the early 80s. My older brother Robert, he was the one to turn me on to Max Creek. He would come home, and he's like 6 years older than me. So he would come home and say, "Hey man, I saw this great band. I'm going to see it. Agora Ballroom, and these the living room or wherever they went to go see them at the time, and the Cell Block." And I started listening to them that way, and then I would go visit him, and I had the chance to see them as a kid. I was probably 13 or so, and so my brother would go to many shows, and then he and his friends like Nick Lombardi and John Lombardi, who they went to school, engineering school at the college, and they got to know the band pretty well, and the music was constantly played. There was Grateful Dead, and there was Max Creek, and a lot of other music. So everybody knew of other bands, but Max Creek was kind of like this. It was like having sushi for the first time. Turn some. I know that band. I know this band, but how about Max Creek? So I realized it was like a cool thing to know their music, and I got to meet the guys when I was really young, and then years went by, and I was listening to their music just like I was listening to everything back then. I was listening to a lot of 60s music and also started to get into jazz and some classical. But Max Creek, that name just kept coming back to me, all through the years. And I got into their music, Drink the Stars, I would play. That was like my regular playlist, an album.
What was the band like during those early shows for you when you went to those concerts? I mean, what was the vibe like when you were walking into some of those places?
For me, it was a trip going to see them because I was underage. I would kind of go in with my brother or someone else, that allowed me to go in. And the vibe was not much different than it is now. People were excited about going to see this band, and they knew they were going to have a good time. And it was accessible enough as opposed to going to like a big concert like Madison Square Garden or Nassau Coliseum or one of these big shows. There was more of an intimacy, with the music, the band, and the sound was always really good for the most part. And as a kid, it was impressive to see this rock band really dynamically play up there. And that's when I started getting into, as a teenager, 14, 15, 16 years old, really getting into live music and the interaction between musicians on stage, jazz musicians. And, I used to watch videos of Charlie Parker and, how he would interact with his musicians, and Miles Davis, and then the rock musicians and how they were positioned on stage, the aesthetic of the whole live concert experience. And Max Creek, to me, exemplified that, that kind of, we're delivering a quality product here, and it's going to be fun too.
Were you, as a teenager, coming into your own as an artist? Were you sort of exploring where you wanted to go in your creative realm?
I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I was reading a lot, but like I was the youngest in my family, so I would, I was exposed to music and live music. I mean, as a teenager, I was lucky enough to have, older brothers who were willing to take me around sometimes. I think by the time I was about 16, 17, I was already writing poetry, and I was very interested in the spoken word tradition, the oral tradition of telling stories and sharing stories and incorporating music into it. So, I was coming of age as an artist and listening to a lot of different types of music and reading a lot. I was not a good student in school. I was I did okay academically, but I used to get in trouble. I was a disruptive student. I would get kicked out because, I'd always crack a joke. I was a class clown in a way at times. And they would send me down to the principal's office, with a notebook. And I would write poetry in those notebooks. And those were my early notebooks, were in the principal's office. If that office was full, they would put me in the nurse's office. And I would be in the nurse's office. She had a little side room there, and they would put me in there. And I'd be there with a notebook, and I'd be just writing poems. And that was really the first time I had real conversations with myself, in the subconscious. So I became aware of that dialogue and became comfortable with it. And that's where the poetry, I think, was born, from that kind of inner conversation.
It seems as though music, though, has sort of influenced at least part of your career, right? Because you had or maybe still are, working with music as sort of a backdrop to how you do your art? Or how would you explain that, I guess?
Well, I mean, a writer first and foremost. My main love, or my main gig, so to speak, is writing. Pen to paper or typing. I'm a writer. And then secondly, a performer and a stage person, and then an actor and a painter. But it all comes from the same place, which is the poetry. I was always interested in the synthesis of music and poetry, going back to, it's ancient. This didn't start in the 60s or 50s with Jack Kerouac and David Amram. It goes back to, Homer. It goes back to ancient peoples and indigenous peoples with music and telling stories. The storyteller being the wise man or wise woman, so to speak, the wise person. Not everybody had a grasp on language. Not everybody had the ability to read. When language became developed in ancient peoples, not everyone understood, even going back, even in the past century. There's a lot of illiterate people, but if you were a good storyteller, you could kind of hide within that and tell a damn good story. I had an uncle of mine who never saw past 8th grade education, but he told damn good stories. So I was always interested in that, the flair and gospel. And I used to watch sometimes as a kid. I'd watch on TV, the evangelists and the holy rollers. And it's fascinating. It's a weird channel, and you see someone delivering a message to the masses. And I thought I was more interested in the impact of that spoken word and how it can really incite and ignite and inspire. And we know that through history, what language and the spoken word, the power of it is. I didn't know the power of it as a kid. I just knew that it was something I was interested in. And as a poet, I had a place to put it, and that is on stage with music.
When I looked online, it looks like you've performed on stage with Max Creek at least a few dozen times since around the mid-90s. And curious, how did that first invitation come to you to come up on stage and perform your poetry with the band?
I was at Wetlands in New York City, the old club. That's no longer in existence. But Max Creek would play there fairly regularly, I suppose. And this was, I think, in 1995. And at the time, I had met some of the band members to a point where I think I might have had one or two of their numbers. Like Rob Fried was really the one, the percussionist, the late percussionist, the late, great Rob Fried. Well, he got a hold of one of my demo tapes I had, and he called me up. He said, "Man, this is great. You ought to sit in with us sometime." And I'm like, "Man, that would be great." And at the time, I was performing with my own band called Spoken Motion, all around New York and around New England and other parts of the country too. In around 1993, 4, 5, I was established as a fairly well-known spoken word artist. I was getting press. I was performing all over. And in '94, I was, I would perform. I performed at Wetlands, and my friend David Nolan, who was the DJ at the time there, was recording he would record every show there. And he was also on the poetry circuit too. So he would record at St. Mark's Poetry Project. He recorded all the poetry readings. New York was flourishing with poetry readings in the 90s. I mean, it was, we got a sheet of paper every month, and poetry calendar, and you'd fish through it, look, where the next poetry readings. I would hit all these open readings of it. But then I started my band, and Larry McDonald from Gil Scott-Heron's band was in my group, and Joe Isgro, the bass player, and horn player, Eric Lawrence, and Elliot Levin. And I was very interested in Rob Fried's approach to playing music. He had kind of this muscular kind of, and I don't mean that physically, I mean that like muscular approach to laying rhythms down. It wasn't like about being a showman, but it was like driving the music. It was always there, and it was colorful. I really dug his playing. And then I met Scott. And I knew the members in the band, but not on really a deep personal level. It was more passive. And Scott was like, and this was downstairs, in between sets down at Wetlands. "Sure, man, come on up, And I went on stage sometime in the second set. I read a poem. And, I was high on that for days. I just called me up a couple of days later. Rob Fried was like, "Man, that was great, And I remember it being kind of a slower piece or something more tranquil. And over the years, my readings with them have developed into these, these little nuggets of, you don't know if it's going to be mellow or if it's going to be, highly energetic. And one thing Mark Mercier said to me years later, said, "What you're doing is you're making it really interesting for us too as well." And that was kind of nice to hear, because for me it was an honor to be sitting with this band that I loved.
Is there a connection between the improvisational, free-flowing style of a band like Max Creek and maybe the openness to have a poet find a lane in there to sort of, elaborate on the expression that's happening on stage?
Yeah, you hit a good point there. It couldn't happen with any band. I mean, I believe I could probably sit in with any band. And at the time when I first started sitting in with these groups like Max Creek and others, I felt I could probably do this with anybody. But what I found, even in New Orleans, when I went to tour down there, these great musicians were reluctant to have a poet on stage with them. I think because there's a fear in failing, you see? And what Max Creek does is they have a space in their music. And a lot of bands have the space, but not only do they have the space, but they have the generosity and the mentality and the interest and the curiosity to bring someone like a poet on stage with them. Not every band can do that. In fact, some bands would like to, but they're branded, or somebody's paying them a lot of money to be a certain way, to look a certain way, and they can't mess with that. I get that. I totally get it. I have friends that I've spoken at length with about that are in that position, that they resent their own success in a way because they're like, "Oh, wow, there's things I would like to do, but I can't because I'm branded a certain way." Max Creek never had that problem. They were, and I mean that affectionately. I mean, they were always able to just be about the music and never about something insincere or something inaccessible. So in that lies the opportunity for a poet or someone like myself to go on stage with them, because there's no risk. I mean, well, there's a risk in that I might screw up the whole show and say something stupid. I mean, that's the risk about having a poet on there. But that's what I love about Max Creek. They're willing to take that risk, and for me to be asked back on numerous occasions has been a great honor.
One of the videos I love of Max Creek that features you in Costa Rica with Bill Kreutzmann from the Grateful Dead. Does that memory stand out to you as something special, or what do you remember about that, I guess?
Oh yeah, that jumps right out at me. That memory is something that just comes out and grips me and has held me for all these years and always will. It was a great experience. First of all, being in Costa Rica with Max Creek, just being in Costa Rica is a trip. You're there in January and it's you're getting a sunburn. You leave New Jersey on a frozen Thursday morning and you're hanging out by a pool sipping a sangria. Billy Kreutzmann's over there in the corner, and then Max Creek's setting up. I mean, can't get better than that. But you can get better than that, and that is when Max Creek asks you to sit in with them, specifically when Billy's playing during their set. And, that's how it was set up. So Frank, we want you to come on during the second set. But we didn't say we want to have like a certain groove or rhythm or anything. We relied on those years of experience of organic kind of improvisation. And so when I was on stage with Max Creek doing that poem, I really felt good. I felt comfortable. I felt relaxed, and I had been there already for 1 or 2 days, so I had settled into the area there a little bit. And there was a point where I was on stage, in between verses, I turned around and I caught eye contact with Billy, and he looked, and I saw these wagon wheels of eyes, and this anticipation on his face, and this look of, yeah, man, like nodding, like these quick nods that he was giving his classic Billy Kreutzmann kind of excitable drumming that he was just looking right at me, like looking, and turn around, and I got back into the poem, and I could hear over the music, that joy, and it was a trip. And afterwards, it dawned on me. I said, how many times did Garcia turn around and see that and look at that face? Got all kind of warm and fuzzy thinking about that. But it was a magical experience. And afterwards, I had a chance to speak with Bill quite a bit, and he said that he wished that the Grateful Dead had done more of that kind of thing over the years. But this goes back to my thing about the trap of some bands that some things they just can't do. They did have readings. Ken Nordine, I think, sat in with them a couple times. Allen Ginsberg back in the day, but it was very few and far between, as you know, unless it was a benefit concert, when someone sat in with them. It was so rare because they were the Grateful Dead brand, and and I love them, but they almost couldn't have musicians come in and sit in unless it was someone like Bob Dylan. How are you going to pass that up? There were opportunities there that were missed, I think. With Max Creek, never had that problem. But Billy, it seemed fun for him. You see, here I am. I might as well be another musician in a way, because you bring something to the stage, and your voice becomes an instrument. But then the poem becomes an instrument because there's words attached to it. And the audience, the crowd was just, on every word, like the call and response was amazing. That's one thing that's great about performing live too, is the energy, between the. You feel it when you're up there. For people that don't know what that's like, it's like kind of shaking hands with a lot of people at the same time, or hugging a lot of people at the same time. It's a beautiful, wonderful experience performing and getting that love and giving that love. So Max Creek is very good at that.
So 2021 is the 50th anniversary of this band, Max Creek, and I'm curious what you think is so special about this band that has kept them together this long.
Well, I think the fans have helped keep them around for a long time, because they are a live band, and they celebrate life, they celebrate joy, they celebrate the history of music by doing what they do. They celebrate Americana, they celebrate world music. What keeps them together is searching for that joy, that constant joy of celebration. As long as there's people and there's music, you'll put them together and you'll have what's called a concert. And I'll be there. I want to celebrate. I was there at their 30th. I was there at their 40th. And then they should call it the first 50 years, because the next 50 years, when they retire and become dentists, people come to their 120th birthday, and I'll be at my 98th birthday, and I'll be there reading poetry with him, hopefully. I don't know what keeps Max Creek around. What makes it special? It's just these guys truly love what they're doing. They truly love the fans, and they love making music, and we love them for that. Happy birthday, Max Creek.
On the back of your 2002 book, Disorderly Conduct, which I got off of eBay, there's a quote there from somebody named Donna Coe from Playboy magazine. I'm going to read this, and I want to get your reaction to it. Donna said, Messina delivers with passion and ferocity in a place where audacity meets chivalry, vulgarity meets eloquence. He is, without question, a genius of Generation X. So for listeners who may not be familiar with your poetry or your performances as a spoken word artist, how would you describe the themes or topics you cover, and how close did that quote get to it?
Well, maybe that's a kind of generous quote in a way, but I mean, maybe what she was getting at was the topics I cover generally are very personal to me. I write about what I know usually and what I love. I write about what I understand. It's very hard if you got to write a paper or something and you don't really know what you're writing about. So with poetry, you write about your father dying, or you write about the car wreck you saw, or the joy you felt when the Mets won the World Series, or if you're a Red Sox fan, if the Red Sox won the World Series. You write about what you love and what you know, or what affects you. Well, in that book, particularly, Disorderly Conduct is also on the heels of 9/11. You see, that came out right after 9/11, and there was poems in there that I wrote that are directly related to my experience as a volunteer down here. I'm in Jersey City right now, where I live right across from the river from where the Trade Center stood. I'm basically not even a mile away from there right now. I wrote about that, and those poems got widely published, and they're in the 9/11 Museum and Memorial now. The original poems, the original journal I wrote, which was a huge honor. I mean, it's better, a lot of poets aim to win the Pulitzer Prize or something like that, but for me, that was the greatest honor. And it was also, I found some closure in that. I could park those poems that were born from such tragedy, and turmoil, and put it somewhere, And for 100 years from now, somebody could, maybe read through it and get something out of it. It'd be historically important, maybe. The vulgarity or in the eloquence, and I think she's talking about dichotomy there, And again, that is, I think she was at the time with Playboy magazine, so at the time she had to have some relationship to physicalness, to the poetry. I mean, I guess. No, I like that quote. I haven't heard that quote in a long time, or that blurb. It's interesting how people interpret your work. Sometimes it's frightening, other times you just don't care. But she particularly, I think, grabbed on my performance as well.
So we're in 2021 in the middle of a pandemic, and I'm wondering, do you see this state we're in as something that could be reflected in poetry, or something that you've thought about? I'm curious just sort of where you're at today with how the world's going.
I don't think I have any choice but to contemplate and to write about it. I mean, as a poet, as any artist, it's really a responsibility of ours, to confront any condition, the human condition, and digest it in some way, and make sense of it. We're in it, so in a way we can't do it now. It has to be a year from now or something. But we could at least celebrate what we do have, and that is we have each other, and maybe we have 450,000 less people in this country. But I have to say, from my own personal experience, I mean, I've been a parent now through this pandemic. My son was born in June 2019, and we had a pandemic started less than a year later. And then there were demonstrations. I live a few blocks away from City Hall, and I'm reading Dr. Seuss to my son at 7:30 in August with the window open, and I could hear demonstrations down the street. I could hear the uprising and the people and all this. I never watched the news in the last year. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. I had only the sense of love for my child and my family and the people in my life, and humanity I care about greatly. I mean, I wish I could do more. But every day hearing about someone dying and losses, I mean, I lost 3 friends in the pandemic. I have not been able to acknowledge and have any closure with that because and I'm just one person that is experiencing this. So what we're finding, I think, all around the world now, people not able to find closure in some of the most deepest tragedies that have happened in their life in the last year. You can't have a funeral and send someone off properly. There's a dozen people that I know personally, really, that I love that have died. 3 good friends, and then I have friends whose parents or a relative died. And there's so much pain, and so do you get caught in the pain, or do you have the joy help you get through? And there's also another problem we have now is mental illness, is anxiety, and people flirting with disaster really by indulging in things that they think are going to help them, and it only makes it worse. I have a theory about this, is that if you remain healthy as an artist, you remain a great artist, and you're able to help anybody else. When you're on a plane, or if you're on a boat and sinking or whatever, and you need that oxygen mask, you put it on yourself first, and then you help others, because you can't help anybody else if you're sick, or if you don't have oxygen, or if you're stoned so much to the point where you can't help your child. We have a responsibility now more than ever to help others, but we first have to take care and protect ourselves by wearing masks and being considerate of others. And I mean, my son's 19 months old. All he knows now are people in masks. It's a strange reality. It's bizarre as hell. It's insane. That's why music, like Max Creek, and the poetry and the arts is so important. And I'm going to tell you another thing, Korre, I have a theory about, is that if you look in history, through history, after every pandemic or every major world catastrophe, world wars, but particularly pandemics, you'll see what follows is a cultural revolution. And so my belief is that, in theory, is that there will be another cultural revolution in the next couple of years. It'll take 2 to 3 years. There will be a lot of music, new art, and it has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with humanity's yearning and human nature, the yearn to connect. How many people have not hugged in the last year? Who have they hugged? When was the last time, Korre, you high-fived somebody at a show because Scott Morowski did a great solo, or your favorite baseball team, hit a home run? I mean, that joy, that tribal kind of, it's missing from the culture right now. So there will be, because we're human beings, have gotten through pandemics, we've gotten through wars, major wars, and we've gotten through adversity, and we always celebrate at the end.
Well, that certainly is a silver lining I'm looking for sure. I'm not sure if you're prepared for this or not, but I'm willing to ask if you're willing to do it. Do you have a poem that you'd be open to reading on this Hooked on Creek podcast for fans?
Of course. I'll read Disorderly Conduct. Someone told me recently that this poem now makes it's relevant even today than it was when I wrote it back in 2002. Disorderly Conduct. You're all under arrest for giving in to your oppressors. Anything you don't do or won't say can and will be used against you. You are hereby charged with complacency in the first degree, possession of ambivalence, and failure to obey a distress signal from your fellow citizens. You have the right to remain valiant, shouting down the big machine with words of rage till daybreak. Instead, you crouch down in silence, drinking, smoking, choking, while your own family stands on trial. You have the right to bear arms up against the cold steel face of injustice, break down barbed walls of dogma. You have the right to burn the straitjacket, the suffocating drapery smothering your daughter's dreams. You have the right to make a left turn. You have the right not to be straight. You have the right to do the right thing, but you're all guilty of everything. You have the right to not go gentle into that good night. You have the right to fight, to break open the pale face of hatred and shut it down once and for all human race. You have the right to steal the keys to freedom's door, dangling from tyranny's drooling jaw. You have the right to infiltrate, to violate, to launch a coup d'etat. You have the right to break in and enter. Instead, you break down and bolt, abandoning naked children that are lying, dying, crying beside crooked gates of hell. You have the right to overthrow the king, whose castle's walls your own hands built. So you're all guilty of everything. Guilty of lethargy, Guilty of medicating your life away from the harsh truths that daylight brings. Guilty of talking the talk, but not walking the walk. Guilty of not working for peace. Guilty of not working for peace. Guilty of not working for peace. Get against the wall. You've been condemned and convicted by the people for your crimes against them. Look up at the sun through blindfolded eyes until it hurts you to see. And remember those you betray. And remember, yes, you're all guilty. We're guilty. Guilty of everything. Guilty of everything. Guilty of everything.
Frank, thank you so much. That's incredible. I am honored to have your voice on this podcast and have that be featured in this little experiment I'm doing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for Max Creek. It's incredible. Thank you so much. Frank, what are you working on nowadays?
So I'm currently working on a book about the abstract expressionist artist Nicholas Corone, who you might know Jackson Pollock, you might know William de Kooning, but you might not know Nick Corone. He lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, an Italian-American, born 1917, died in 2010. I got to know him quite well because I was researching at the time the relationship between jazz and poetry and the abstract expressionist painters, particularly Jackson Pollock. And so he was still alive at the time, 2006. I did an interview with him, and then I wrote an article on him. And then the family commissioned me, asked me if I would do a book. And they said, well, what would it take to do a book? I said, a shit ton of money and a lot of time. So we signed a deal, and it'll be finished, I think, in June. And hopefully by, after this pandemic, we'll do a release in 2022 probably, because this year's going to be a wash, I think. But it's been a great experience writing the book. I interviewed 100 people or more. The relationship between jazz, between poetry, between the abstract expressionists and New Jersey, and Frank Sinatra, and Marilyn Monroe, and all the other great people that interweave into Nick's life. And then I'll do a screenplay on it as well, probably make it into a film.
Cool. Frank, if fans of the podcast want to learn more about you, do you have a website with more information?
Sure. You can go to frankmessina.com, FrankMessina.com.
All right. Frank, thank you so much for joining me on Hooked on Creek.
Thank you. My pleasure. Go Creek.
It was a huge honor talking with Frank Messina, and I really hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. Coming up now, I'm going to play some music and poetry from Max Creek's live performance at the Webster Theater in Hartford, Connecticut, back on September 19th, 1998. From the second set, this is Love Makes You Lose Your Mind, into Poetry with Frank Messina, into Wild Side.
On the line, I got my ass kicked out the door. My name was on the line. She took my dollar, she took my dime. But love makes me lose my mind.
Frank. It's your cue, Frank. Where are you? Slipping through the icy darkness. Frank Messina. Frank Messina, Max Creek poet resident. He brought the big book with him. The big book. We got the little book tonight.
This is the night that crayfish dance for joy. And their claws heave mad elements upon us. And juggling hotel maids clean me out of cash. In this town, you can fall to the ground. You can burn yourself to the ground, the charlatans and myth makers, the soothsayers. They've found their way into my closets, into my drawers. They're spilling liquor on me and giggling with the glee of seduction. this town, cheap thrills are tossed around like confetti. There are no limits and no laws to hide behind because we're here for the music. And when the music has its end of life, when life has its sweet end, there are no tears to shed. The friends you've befriended, the lovers you've loved, are now lost to the big wheel in the sky. Suddenly crawl from their coffins and quarters of slumber and join you in the magical dance of New Orleans town.
on your way, moving crazy to the beat. She's the girl, the kind you wanna meet. Say, hey lady, Won't you look this way? You will have no other. You'll be mine today. 'Cause she's got a wild side for me. Hey, she's got a wild, wild side for me. Just look in her eyes. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Wild as the night, she shines just like the day. Giving into reason, take me through the night. Standing here in darkness, I'm taken by her light. 'Cause she's got a wild side for me. Hey, she's got a wild, wild side for me. There she goes. She swings her yellow hair. Song in the nighttime, a whisper in the air. Might just be her style. There's rhythm in her feet. She'll just love another and move on with the beat. 'Cause she's got a wild side for me. Yeah, she's got a wild, wild side for me. Yeah, she's got a wild side for me. Yeah, she's got a wild, wild side for me.
That concludes episode 27 of Hooked on Creek. As always, let me know if you have suggestions for future episodes or recommendations on people to interview for this podcast. You can get in touch with me via the contact link on the Hooked on Creek website at hookedoncreek.com or via Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Hooked on Creek to get connected. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in.